The needle slipped through Bridger Emerson's calloused fingers for the third time that morning, and he threw the shirt across his ranch house kitchen with a curse that would have made his late mother blush. The buttons hung by threads. The sleeve had a tear the size of Texas, and he had exactly 2 wearable shirts left to his name, both of which smelled like cattle and sweat even after washing. It was September 1884, and the autumn sun already beat down mercilessly on his ranch outside McGill, Nevada, where copper mining had brought an influx of workers but precious few women with domestic skills for hire. His wife Alina had been gone 2 years now, taken by fever so sudden and cruel that some mornings he still expected to find her humming in the kitchen, and his 7-year-old daughter Rosemary was currently at school in town, which left him alone with a pile of mending that seemed to mock his every attempt at self-sufficiency. He picked up the shirt, smoothed it out with hands better suited to roping steers than threading needles, and decided that enough was enough. The ranch foreman could handle things for a few hours while he rode into McGill to find someone, anyone, who could sew a straight seam. The alternative was walking around half-naked or spending money he needed for winter feed on new clothes, neither of which appealed to him in the slightest. McGill sprawled in the high desert valley like a promise half-kept, its main street lined with buildings that ranged from sturdy brick to hastily constructed wood frames. The copper smelter dominated the eastern edge of town, its smokestacks visible for miles, and the population had swelled to nearly 800 souls in the past 5 years. Bridger tied his horse outside the general store and hefted his basket of torn shirts, worn trousers, and Rosemary's dresses that needed letting down, feeling every inch the fool as he walked inside. Martha Whitley, the store owner's wife, looked up from her counter and smiled with the kind of pity that made Bridger's jaw tighten. "Mending again, Bridger? You know anyone who does alterations?" he asked, skipping the pleasantries. "I will pay fair wages." Martha tapped her chin thoughtfully. "There is a woman, just arrived last week on the stage. Miriam Kane, I think her name is. She took a room above the milliner's shop and put up a sign advertising sewing services. Haven't heard much about her yet, but her stitching looked mighty fine on the sample she showed me. Much obliged." Bridger touched his hat brim and headed back into the bright sunlight, his basket bouncing against his hip as he walked 3 buildings down to the milliner's shop. A small wooden sign hung beside the exterior staircase. "Seamstress Services Mending, Alterations, Custom Work M. Kane." He climbed the narrow stairs and knocked on the door, half expecting no answer. Instead, footsteps approached, and the door opened to reveal a woman who made him forget every word of English he had ever learned. She stood perhaps 5.5 feet tall, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun that nevertheless allowed a few rebellious curls to frame her face. Her eyes were the color of sage in summer, green with flecks of gray, and they assessed him with a directness that most women in McGill avoided. She wore a simple blue dress with a white apron, and her hands showed the slight calluses of someone who worked with needle and thread for hours each day. Bridger guessed her to be in her mid-20s, maybe 3 or 4 years younger than his own 31 years. "Can I help you?" Her voice carried a slight accent he could not quite place, something Eastern and refined. "I need mending." He held up the basket like an offering. "Shirts, trousers, some children's clothes. Martha Whitley said you do alterations." She stepped back from the doorway. "Come in. Let me see what you have." The room was small but scrupulously clean, with a sewing table positioned near the window to catch the best light. Bolts of fabric leaned against one wall, and a dress form stood in the corner wearing a half-finished garment in cheerful yellow calico. The space smelled of lavender and starch, so different from the dust and leather smell of his ranch that Bridger felt like he had stepped into another world entirely. Miriam took the basket and began sorting through its contents with practiced efficiency, her fingers testing seams and examining tiers. "How did you manage to rip this sleeve so thoroughly?" she asked, holding up the shirt he had thrown that morning. "Caught it on a nail in the barn," he lied, not wanting to admit his own frustration had caused the damage. She gave him a look that suggested she did not believe him but was too polite to say so. "These buttons need replacing entirely. The thread is rotten. And this shirt needs the collar turned before it falls apart completely. Can you do it?" "Of course I can do it. The question is, when do you need it done, and how much are you willing to pay?" They negotiated a price that seemed more than fair to Bridger, and a timeline of 1 week for the full basket. Miriam wrote out a receipt in neat, flowing script and handed it to him along with a measuring tape. "I will need to take measurements for your daughter's dresses if you want them to fit properly when I let them down. She is at school right now. I could bring her by tomorrow after lessons." "That would be fine. 3 o'clock tomorrow, then." Bridger found himself reluctant to leave, which was absurd given that they had only just met. "You are new to McGill. I arrived 8 days ago from Philadelphia." She folded the measuring tape with precise movements. "My aunt lived here until she passed last spring. She left me her sewing equipment and enough money for the stage fare west. That was generous of her. She was a generous woman." Something flickered across Miriam's face, a shadow of grief that Bridger recognized all too well. "I had nothing keeping me in Philadelphia anymore, so I decided a fresh start might be exactly what I needed." He understood that sentiment down to his bones. "Well, welcome to McGill. It is not much compared to Philadelphia, I imagine, but the people are mostly good." "Mostly good is better than mostly bad." She smiled, and it transformed her entire face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "I will have your mending ready by next Tuesday, Mr. Emerson." He realized he had never introduced himself and felt heat creep up his neck. "How did you know my name?" "It is sewn into the collar of 2 of your shirts. Your late wife's work, I would guess, given the precision of the lettering." The mention of Alina should have stung, but somehow coming from this stranger's lips it felt like simple observation rather than painful reminder. "Yes, she was good with a needle. I can tell. I will do my best to honor her standards." Bridger left the seamstress's rooms feeling oddly lighter than when he had arrived, despite leaving behind his entire wearable wardrobe. He collected Rosemary from school that afternoon and mentioned they would need to visit the seamstress the next day for measurements. His daughter, who had her mother's dark hair and his own gray eyes, perked up immediately. "A real seamstress? Does she have pretty fabrics?" "I saw some bolts of cloth in her rooms, yes, but we are just going for measurements, Rosie, not for new dresses." "But my dresses are getting so short, Papa. All the girls at school laugh because they can see my ankles." He sighed, already knowing he had lost this battle before it began. "We will see what she says tomorrow." The next afternoon, Bridger knocked on Miriam Kane's door again, this time with Rosemary bouncing excitedly beside him. Miriam opened the door wearing a different dress, this one a practical gray that somehow made her eyes look even greener by contrast. "You must be Rosemary," she said warmly, crouching down to the girl's height. "Your father tells me you need your dresses let down." "They are terribly short," Rosemary said with all the drama of a 7-year-old facing a fashion crisis. "Everyone at school notices." "Well, we cannot have that. Come stand on this stool for me, and we will make sure everything fits just right." Bridger watched as Miriam measured his daughter with gentle competence, noting numbers in a small leather book. She asked Rosemary about school, about her favorite colors, about what she liked to do on the ranch, and his daughter chattered away as if they had known each other for years rather than minutes. It struck him how long it had been since Rosemary had interacted with a woman who treated her with such kind attention. His ranch hands were good men, but they treated his daughter like delicate porcelain, afraid to engage her in actual conversation. "Miss Kane, do you have any ribbons?" Rosemary asked suddenly. "My mother used to put ribbons in my hair, but Papa does not know how to tie them properly." Miriam glanced at Bridger, something soft in her expression. "I have several colors. Would you like to see?" She produced a wooden box filled with ribbons in every shade imaginable, and Rosemary gasped with delight. "Could you show me how to tie them? Papa tries, but they always fall out by lunchtime. I think we could manage a quick lesson." Miriam selected a blue ribbon that matched Rosemary's dress and proceeded to demonstrate several different ways to secure it, narrating each step so Rosemary could learn. Bridger watched his daughter's face glow with happiness and felt something in his chest crack open, a hairline fracture in the wall he had built around his heart. When they finally left, Rosemary clutched the blue ribbon like treasure and talked non-stop all the way back to the ranch. "She is so nice, Papa, and she said she could teach me to sew if you said it was all right. Can I learn, please?" "We will see, Rosie. She is a working woman. She might not have time for teaching." But the next Tuesday, when he went to collect his mending, the first thing Miriam said after greeting him was, "Your daughter is welcome to visit on Saturday afternoons if she wants to learn basic stitching. No charge for the lessons. I find I miss having company while I work." The mending was perfect, better than perfect actually. Every seam was straight, every button secured with precision, and she had even reinforced the stress points on his work shirts without being asked. The price she charged remained exactly what they had agreed upon, despite the extra work. "This is exceptional," Bridger said honestly. "I have not had shirts that fit this well since a leaner past." "Your late wife was thinner than you are now," Miriam observed. "I took out the seams slightly to account for your current build. I hope that was not presumptuous." He looked at her in surprise. How had she noticed such a thing? But it was true that he had gained muscle mass in the 2 years since Alina's death, throwing himself into physical labor as an escape from grief. "That was thoughtful, thank you. You are welcome." She handed him the basket, now neatly organized with his clothes folded precisely. "And I meant what I said about Rosemary. She seems like a bright girl who could benefit from learning a practical skill." So began a pattern that would define the next several months. Every Saturday afternoon, Bridger would bring Rosemary into town, ostensibly just to drop her at the seamstress's rooms for lessons. But more often than not, he found himself staying, sitting in the chair by the window while Miriam taught his daughter to thread needles and sew straight seams. At first, he justified his presence as parental supervision, but gradually he admitted to himself that he simply enjoyed being there, listening to Miriam's calm voice as she explained the intricacies of different stitches, watching her patient corrections when Rosemary's stitches went crooked. They talked while Rosemary concentrated on her work, conversations that ranged from the mundane details of ranch life to deeper discussions about loss and starting over. Miriam had been engaged to a man in Philadelphia. She told him one October afternoon when the light slanted golden through the window. He had broken off the engagement 6 months before their wedding, having fallen in love with Miriam's younger sister instead. "The worst part was not losing him," she said quietly, her needle moving steadily through the hem she was stitching. "It was losing my sister and my parents in one blow. They sided with her, said I should be understanding, that true love could not be denied, as if my feelings did not matter at all." Bridger felt anger kindle in his chest on her behalf. "That is unconscionable. It is what it is. My aunt's letter arrived like a lifeline, telling me I could come west if I wanted a fresh start. She died before I could get here, but she left me the means to begin again. Miriam looked up from her sewing, meeting his eyes directly. Some days I think that fresh start is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. I understand that, he said. After Alina died, I thought about selling the ranch, moving somewhere new where everything did not remind me of her. But I have Rosemary to think about, and the ranch is her inheritance. So instead, I just kept working, kept moving forward, and eventually the sharp edges of grief wore down to something I could live with. Does it get easier? It gets different. Some days are harder than others, but yes, it gets easier to breathe. Rosemary looked up from her crooked seam. Are you sad, Papa? He reached over and ruffled her hair. Not right now, sweetheart. Right now I am just fine. As autumn deepened into early winter, Bridger found himself inventing reasons to visit town more frequently. He needed thread for Rosemary's sewing lessons. He wanted to order a new winter coat. He had a tear in his good Sunday shirt that needed mending. Each excuse brought him to Miriam's door, and each visit lasted longer than strictly necessary. He was not the only man in McGill who had noticed the attractive new seamstress. Marcus Thorne, who owned the largest saloon in town, began courting her openly in November, sending flowers and inviting her to dinners. Bridger told himself he had no right to feel jealous, that Miriam was a free woman who could spend time with whomever she pleased, but the sight of Thorne's fancy buggy outside the milliner's shop made his hands clench into fists. I do not like that man, Rosemary announced one Saturday as they climbed the stairs to Miriam's rooms. He smells like cigars and he talked to me like I was a baby. When did you meet Marcus Thorne? Last week when we were leaving. He was just arriving and he patted my head and said, "Run along, little girl." I am not a baby, Papa. I am 7 3/4. Bridger hid his smile at her indignation but felt quietly pleased that his daughter had taken a dislike to his rival. Not that Thorne was his rival, because that would imply Bridger had some claim on Miriam's affections, which he most certainly did not, except that when Miriam opened the door that afternoon, her smile seemed to brighten several degrees when she saw him. Bridger, I am glad you are here. I wanted your opinion on something. She had never asked his opinion on anything before, and the request sent an absurd thrill through his chest. Of course. What do you need? Marcus Thorne has asked me to marry him. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Bridger gripped the doorframe to steady himself, aware that Rosemary had gone very still beside him. That was fast. He is a pragmatic man. He says he needs a wife to help run his business interests, and I need security. He has offered generous terms. Miriam's voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. You love him? The question burst out before Bridger could stop it. She looked at him for a long moment, those sage-green eyes searching his face. No. But I did not love my former fiancé either, not really, and everyone said we were a perfect match. Perhaps love is not as important as mutual respect and compatible goals. That is horse shit. The curse slipped out and he saw Rosemary's eyes widen. Sorry, Rosie. But Miriam, you cannot marry a man you do not love, not when you deserve so much more than that. And what do I deserve, Bridger? Her voice had gone soft, almost challenging. He wanted to say me. Wanted to tell her that he had been half in love with her since that first afternoon when she had made Rosemary smile, that every Saturday had become the highlight of his week, that the thought of her married to Marcus Thorne made him want to punch something. But the words stuck in his throat, tangled up with loyalty to Alina's memory and fear that he was reading too much into friendly conversations and warm smiles. You deserve someone who makes your heart race, he said finally. someone who sees you as more than a convenient solution to a business problem. You deserve to be cherished, not just respected. Something flickered across her face, too quick for him to read. That is a romantic notion, but I am nearly 26 years old, and I have learned that romantic notions do not pay the rent or put food on the table. So you are going to accept him. I told him I needed time to think about it. He has given me until Christmas to decide. That gave Bridger 6 weeks to figure out what he was feeling and work up the courage to do something about it. 6 weeks to compete with a wealthy saloon owner who could offer Miriam security and status in town. 6 weeks to risk his heart again after 2 years of keeping it carefully guarded. He left without saying anything else, afraid he would say too much, and Rosemary was uncharacteristically quiet on the ride home. Finally, as they crossed onto ranch land, she said, "Papa, you should marry Miss Kane instead of letting that smelly man have her." "It is not that simple, sweetheart." "Why not? You like her and she likes you, I can tell." "How can you tell?" "She smiles different when you are there, and she asks me questions about you when we are sewing together. What you like to eat, what kind of books you read, whether you are lonely on the ranch." Bridger's heart kicked hard against his ribs. "She asks about me, all the time. And when that Mr. Thorne brings her flowers, she puts them in the back room where no one can see them, but the ribbon I gave her is on her sewing table where she looks at it every day." Out of the mouths of babes. Bridger suddenly felt like the world's biggest fool. He had been so caught up in his own fear and uncertainty that he had missed what apparently was obvious to his 7-year-old daughter. Miriam cared for him. Maybe not love yet, but something that could grow into love if he gave it a chance. The question was what to do about it. He could not compete with Thorne's wealth, but he had other things to offer. A good ranch with productive land, a daughter who adored Miriam already, and a heart that was battered but still capable of loving deeply. He just needed to find the courage to offer those things. That night, after Rosemary had gone to bed, Bridger sat on his porch and looked up at the stars scattered across the Nevada sky. Eleanor had loved stargazing, could name every constellation and tell the stories behind them. He found himself talking to her the way he had not done in months, explaining the situation as if she could hear him. "I think I am falling in love with her, Elle. I know it has only been 2 years and maybe that is too soon, but she makes me feel alive again in a way I thought I had lost forever. Rosie loves her too, but I am scared. Scared of dishonoring your memory, scared of being hurt again, scared that I am not enough for someone like Miriam." He paused, and in the silence, he could almost hear Eleanor's voice, practical and loving as always. "You are being an idiot, Bridger Emerson. I did not raise you to be a coward, and I certainly did not die so you could spend the rest of your life alone." The imagined words made him smile through tears. Eleanor would have liked Miriam, he realized. They were similar in some ways, both practical women who faced life's challenges with quiet strength and did not suffer fools gladly. And Eleanor had made him promise, in those last fevered days before the illness took her, that he would not mourn forever, that he would find happiness again for both his sake and Rosemary's. He had made that promise, but had not believed he would ever want to keep it. Until now. The next morning, Bridger rode into McGill with a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. He stopped first at the general store, where he purchased the finest writing paper they had in stock, and then at the jeweler's, where he spent 20 minutes examining the limited selection of rings before choosing a simple gold band with a small emerald that reminded him of Miriam's eyes. Back at the ranch, he sat at his kitchen table and began to write. The first draft was terrible, too formal and stiff. The second was too emotional, revealing too much too fast. The third attempt found the balance between honesty and restraint, and he sealed it in an envelope before he could second-guess himself again. That afternoon, he rode back to town and climbed the stairs to Miriam's door. She answered looking slightly harried, with a pin cushion strapped to her wrist and measuring tape draped around her neck. "Bridger, I was not expecting you. Is everything all right? I needed to give you this." He handed her the envelope. "Read it when you have time alone. No rush." She took the envelope, her fingers brushing his briefly. "You are being mysterious. I am being terrified, actually, but I decided that was not a good enough reason to stay silent." He touched his hat brim and left before his nerve failed, taking the stairs 2 at a time and riding away before she could open the letter and read his clumsy declaration of feelings. The letter said everything he had been too afraid to say in person. That he had not been looking for love when he met her, had not thought himself capable of it anymore. That somewhere between mending his shirts and teaching his daughter to sew, she had become essential to his happiness. That he could not offer her wealth like Marcus Thorne could, but he could offer her a home where she would be cherished, a daughter who already loved her like a mother, and a man who would spend every day trying to deserve her. That he understood if she did not feel the same way, but he could not let her marry another man without at least knowing how he felt. The next 3 days were the longest of Bridger's life. He threw himself into work, riding fence lines that did not need riding, mending tack that was perfectly fine, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from spinning endless anxious circles. Miriam did not respond to the letter, did not send word, and Bridger began to accept that he had made a terrible mistake, had ruined their friendship by asking for more than she wanted to give. Saturday arrived, and he told Rosemary they should probably skip the sewing lesson this week. His daughter looked at him like he had lost his mind. "But Papa, I am learning to make buttonholes. Miss Kane said it is an essential skill and I cannot miss the lesson." "Rosie, I do not think Miss Kane wants to see me right now. Did you have a fight?" "Not exactly. I just said some things that might have made her uncomfortable." Rosemary crossed her arms, looking remarkably like her mother in one of Alina's stubborn moods. "Papa, if you do not take me to my sewing lesson, I will walk to town by myself, and then you will worry the whole time that something happened to me." She had him there. Bridger sighed and hitched up the wagon, and they rode to McGill in loaded silence. When they reached the milliner's shop, Rosemary bounded up the stairs ahead of him, and he followed slowly, feeling like a man walking to his own execution. Miriam opened the door before they could knock. She had pinned her hair up in a more elaborate style than usual, and she wore a green dress he had not seen before that brought out her eyes beautifully. Her expression gave nothing away. "Good afternoon, Rosemary. Your buttonhole lesson is ready. Bridger, could you stay for a moment? I need to discuss something with you." This was it, then. The polite rejection, the request that he stop coming around so she could move forward with Thorne's proposal without complication. Bridger sent Rosemary inside and braced himself for the blow. Miriam closed the door behind them and turned to face him. "I got your letter. I figured. Listen, if I made things awkward, I apologize. I value your friendship, and I do not want to lose that because I could not keep my feelings to myself." "Stop talking," she said, but there was no heat in the words. "I got your letter, and I stayed up all night rereading it because I could not believe someone saw me the way you described. I have spent most of my life being told I was too practical, too focused on work, not soft enough or feminine enough to inspire real devotion. My former fiancé said I would make an adequate wife, but that my sister made him feel passion. Do you know how much that hurt, being told I was adequate? He was a fool and a bastard, and you are well rid of him." She stepped closer, and Bridger's heart hammered so hard he was sure she could hear it. Your letter did not describe me as adequate. You called me remarkable, essential, worth fighting for. No one has ever said things like that to me before. I meant every word. I know you did. That is what kept me up all night. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and slightly trembling. I told Marcus Thorne this morning that I could not accept his proposal. He was not pleased, asked me if there was someone else, and I realized that yes, there was someone else. Someone who made my heart race every time he walked through the door. Someone whose daughter I had come to love almost as much as I had come to love him. The world seemed to hold its breath. Miriam, are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying that I fell in love with you somewhere between mending your shirts and teaching Rosemary to sew. I am saying that when I imagine my future now, you are in it. If you meant what you wrote in that letter, if you truly want me as part of your life, then my answer is yes, to all of it. Yes. Bridger did not remember deciding to move, but suddenly his hands were framing her face and he was kissing her with all the pent-up longing of the past months. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for the first time since Alina died, Bridger felt complete. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Miriam laughed shakily. I should probably mention that your daughter is watching us through the window with a very satisfied expression on her face. Bridger looked over and saw Rosemary grinning at them, both thumbs raised in approval. He laughed, feeling lighter than air. She told me a week ago that I should marry you instead of letting the smelly man have you. Apparently, my 7-year-old has better sense than I do. Smart girl. Miriam touched his face gently. Are you sure about this, Bridger? I know Alina has only been gone 2 years. I do not want to be a replacement or someone you settle for, because you need help raising Rosemary. You could never be a replacement because you are nothing like Alina, and I mean that as the highest compliment. Elle was my first love, and I will always carry her in my heart, but you are something entirely your own. You are my second chance, my unexpected gift, and if you will have me, I promise to spend every day showing you how grateful I am that you walked into my life. That is a dangerous promise to make. I intend to hold you to it. I hope you do. They stood there grinning at each other like fools until Rosemary knocked on the window and pointed at her practice fabric, reminding them that she had a buttonhole lesson waiting. Miriam laughed and pulled away reluctantly. I should probably teach your daughter, and we should probably discuss practical matters like when and where and how we want to do this. Marry me at Christmas, Bridger said impulsively. Give me 6 weeks to court you properly. Let the town see that we are serious about this, and then marry me on Christmas Day. That is very fast. I am 31 years old, I have been married before, and I know what I want, but if you need more time, I will wait. I just do not want to wait any longer than necessary to start our life together. Miriam considered this, her head tilted in thought. Christmas it is, then. But I want a proper courtship, Bridger Emerson. Dinners and walks and flowers. I may be a practical woman, but I still want to be wooed. I can do wooing. I am a little out of practice, but I am willing to learn. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of carefully planned courtship and growing certainty that they were making the right choice. Bridger took Miriam to dinner at the hotel restaurant every Wednesday evening, brought her wildflowers from the high meadows on his ranch, and spent Sunday afternoons walking with her through McGill, while Rosemary ran ahead pointing out interesting rocks and birds. They talked about everything. Their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, the practicalities of combining their lives. Miriam insisted on visiting the ranch before committing completely, wanting to see where she would be living and what the daily routine would entail. Bridger gave her a thorough tour, watching anxiously as she examined the house with a critical eye. It was a solid structure, built by the previous owner with thick adobe walls that kept it cool in summer and warm in winter, but he had done little to maintain it in the past 2 years beyond basic cleaning. "The house needs work," Miriam said finally, running her hand along the dusty mantelpiece. "Fresh paint, new curtains, a thorough scrubbing of every surface. But the bones are good. I can make this a home again." "We can make it a home again," he corrected. "I do not expect you to do it all alone." She smiled at him with such warmth that he wanted to kiss her right there in his dusty parlor, but Rosemary was watching from the doorway, so he restrained himself. There would be time for kissing later, a whole lifetime of it if he was lucky. They decided to keep the wedding small, just a ceremony at the church in McGill, followed by dinner at the hotel for close friends and Bridger's ranch hands. Miriam made her own wedding dress, a beautiful creation in ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she sewed a matching dress for Rosemary in pale blue so his daughter could stand up with them as part of the ceremony. The night before the wedding, Bridger stood on his porch again, looking up at the stars and talking to Alina one last time. "I think you would like her, Elle. She is different from you, but she is good and strong, and she already loves Rosie like her own. I hope wherever you are happy for us. I hope you know I will never forget you, but I am also ready to move forward. Thank you for the years we had together, and thank you for making me promise not to give up on happiness. I am keeping that promise now." The stars seemed to shine a little brighter, and Bridger chose to take that as a blessing. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the high desert landscape dusted with a light layer of snow that had fallen overnight. Bridger dressed in his best suit, the one Alina had made for him 5 years ago, and stood before the mirror trying to tie his tie with shaking hands. One of his ranch hands, an older man named Thomas, finally took pity on him and tied it properly. "Nervous, terrified," Bridger admitted. "What if I mess this up? What if I am not the husband she deserves?" Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "Son, I have watched you with that woman for the past 2 months, and I have never seen two people more suited to each other. You are going to be just fine. Now stop worrying and go marry your seamstress before she realizes she can do better." The church was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and the small group of guests filled only the first few pews, but to Bridger, it looked as beautiful as any cathedral. Rosemary walked down the aisle first, carefully carrying a bouquet of dried flowers and beaming at everyone she passed. Then the door opened again, and Miriam appeared. She had never looked more beautiful. The ivory dress caught the candlelight and seemed to glow. Her auburn hair was pinned up with flowers woven through it, and she carried a bouquet of winter greenery tied with white ribbon. But what took Bridger's breath away was her expression, the pure joy and certainty shining in her sage-green eyes as she walked toward him. He met her halfway down the aisle, unable to wait the full distance, and offered his arm. She took it with a smile that made his heart skip. "You are supposed to wait at the altar," she whispered. "I got impatient. It is a character flaw. I suppose I can learn to live with it." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of vows and rings, and the minister's sonorous voice pronouncing them husband and wife. Bridger kissed his new wife with perhaps more enthusiasm than was strictly appropriate for church, and the small gathering burst into applause. Rosemary hugged them both, declaring loudly that she was the happiest girl in all of Nevada, and they processed back down the aisle as a family. The dinner at the hotel was a warm, cheerful affair. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was music and dancing late into the evening. Bridger held Miriam in his arms as they waltzed to a slow tune, acutely aware of her warmth pressed against him, the way she fit perfectly in his embrace. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I have been in years, possibly happier than I have ever been." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "Thank you for being brave enough to write that letter. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for mending my shirts and my heart." She laughed, that free, joyful sound he had come to love. "That is terribly romantic and also deeply corny. I am a rancher. We specialize in corn. That joke does not even make sense. I am too happy to care about sense." They stayed at the hotel that night, their wedding night, and Bridger discovered that his practical, straightforward wife had hidden depths of passion that left him breathless and grateful, and even more deeply in love. They lay tangled together afterward, her head on his chest, and talked quietly about the future they would build together. "I want to keep doing my sewing work," Miriam said. "Not just for the money, though that will help with the ranch expenses, but because I enjoy it. Is that all right?" "Of course it is all right. I married you, not your potential as a housewife. You can do whatever makes you happy." "Good. Because I also want to teach Rosemary properly and any other children we might have. I think education is important, especially for girls." "I agree. Anything else?" "I want chickens, a whole flock of them, and a vegetable garden in the spring, and I think we should paint the bedroom blue." Bridger kissed the top of her head. "We can have chickens and gardens and a blue bedroom. We can have whatever you want, as long as you keep looking at me the way you did when you walked down that aisle today." "That is an easy promise to keep." They returned to the ranch the next morning to find that Thomas and the other hands had hung a "Welcome Home" banner over the door and left the house spotlessly clean. Miriam stood in the middle of the parlor, turning in a slow circle, and Bridger could see her mentally cataloging all the changes she wanted to make. "Do not change too much," he said. "Some of the things in here were Aline's, and I would like Rosie to grow up with some connection to her mother." Miriam turned to him with understanding in her eyes. "I have no intention of erasing Aline. She will always be part of this family's history, but I think we can honor her memory while also making this house our own. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." The first months of their marriage brought adjustments and small negotiations, as they learned to share space and make decisions together. Miriam proved to be an excellent manager of household affairs, stretching their budget further than Bridger would have thought possible while also contributing income from her sewing work. She set up a dedicated workroom in what had been an unused bedroom, and soon had a steady stream of clients coming from McGill, and even from some of the outlying mining camps. Rosemary flourished under Miriam's attention. She learned to read better, to sew more complicated projects, and to help with cooking and household chores. But Miriam also made sure she had time to be a child, to run wild on the ranch and climb trees and play with the barn cats. Bridger often found the two of them laughing together over some shared joke, and it filled him with contentment so deep it sometimes felt like an ache. Spring came early to Nevada in 1885, bringing wildflowers to the high meadows and the joyful discovery that Miriam was pregnant. She told him one evening in late March, simply handing him a tiny pair of booties she had knitted. He stared at them uncomprehendingly for a moment before understanding crashed over him. "We are having a baby in October, if my calculations are correct." He swept her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down gently, afraid he might have hurt her. She laughed at his expression. "I am pregnant, Bridger, not made of glass. You can still touch me. Are you happy about this?" "I am terrified and elated in equal measure." "Are you?" He kissed her thoroughly. "I am over the moon. Rosie is going to lose her mind with excitement." Indeed, when they told Rosemary she was going to be a big sister, she shrieked so loudly that half the ranch hands came running to see what was wrong. She immediately began making plans for teaching the baby everything she knew, and Bridger had to gently remind her that newborns could not actually do very much at first. but I can help feed the baby and change diapers and sing songs, right? Absolutely, Miriam assured her. You are going to be the best big sister in Nevada. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot summer months. Miriam continued her sewing work until August, when the heat and her growing belly made sitting for long hours too uncomfortable. They spent the evenings on the porch, Bridger reading aloud while Miriam knitted tiny clothes and Rosemary practiced her letters. In late October, on a crisp autumn day that reminded Bridger of the day he first met Miriam, his wife went into labor. The midwife from McGill arrived quickly, and Bridger spent the next 12 hours pacing the porch while Rosemary held his hand and assured him that everything would be fine. Thomas sat with them, offering quiet companionship and the occasional swig from a flask he kept in his coat. When the baby's first cry finally split the air, Bridger nearly fell over with relief. The midwife emerged an hour later with a smile on her weathered face. You have a healthy son and your wife is tired but doing well. You can go in now. Miriam lay propped against pillows, looking exhausted and radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. Bridger approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his new son's face. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in apparent outrage at being born. He is perfect, Bridger said hoarsely. You are perfect. I cannot believe we made this. I did most of the work, Miriam said dryly, but her eyes were soft. Do you want to hold him? He took his son with careful reverence, marveling at how small and fragile the baby felt. Rosemary climbed onto the bed next to Miriam, peering at her new brother with fascination. What should we name him? She asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son's face, Bridger knew exactly what felt right. Benjamin, he said. Benjamin Thomas Emerson, after my father and the man who has been like a father to me. Miriam smiled. Benjamin is perfect. Welcome to the world, little Benjamin. The baby settled into their lives with surprising ease. He was a calm infant, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and Rosemary proved to be a devoted big sister. Miriam navigated new motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else, though Bridger caught her sometimes just staring at Benjamin with wonder in her eyes, as if she could not quite believe he was real. Winter passed peacefully, and in the spring of 1886, they made improvements to the ranch that Bridger had been planning for years, but had never had the resources or energy to implement. Miriam's sewing income had built up a nice savings, and combined with a good year for cattle sales, they could afford to expand the barn, purchase better breeding stock, and even hire an additional hand to help with the daily work. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Bridger worked the ranch with the help of his hands. Miriam divided her time between managing the household and taking on select sewing projects, and their children grew and thrived. By 1888, Benjamin was a rambunctious 3-year-old who followed his father everywhere. And Rosemary, now 11, had developed a passion for horses that suggested she would become an excellent rancher in her own right someday. Miriam discovered she was pregnant again in the spring of 1889, and in December of that year, they welcomed a daughter they named Margaret after Miriam's late aunt. Margaret had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes, and from the moment she could crawl, she demonstrated a determination that suggested she would be a force to be reckoned with. The ranch prospered year by year. Bridger's careful management and Miriam's fiscal prudence allowed them to weather droughts and market fluctuations that bankrupted some of their neighbors. They expanded their land holdings gradually, purchasing adjacent parcels when they became available, and developed a reputation for raising high-quality cattle. But beyond the material success, what struck Bridger most was the happiness that permeated their daily lives. Miriam had transformed the ranch house into a real home, full of warmth and laughter, and the controlled chaos that came with raising 3 children. He often found her in her workroom, sewing by lamplight after the children had gone to bed, and would sit with her just to be near her, talking about their day or simply enjoying comfortable silence. One evening in 1892, 8 years after that fateful day when he first climbed the stairs to her seamstress rooms, Bridger found Miriam on the porch watching the sunset. The children were playing in the yard, their voices carrying clearly in the still air. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" he asked. "The culture, the society, all the things a city can offer, not even a little bit. This is where I belong, Bridger. Here with you and our children and this life we have built together. I have never been happier. Even though I cannot offer you fancy parties or theater or all the things you grew up with." She turned in his arms to face him. "You offer me something far more valuable. You see me, truly see me, every single day. You value my opinions and respect my work. You make me laugh, and you still look at me like I am the most beautiful woman in the world even after 3 children and 8 years of marriage. Do you know how rare that is? You are the most beautiful woman in the world. That is simply objective fact." She laughed and kissed him. "My practical rancher with the soul of a poet, I love you, Bridger Emerson." "I love you too, Miriam. Thank you for mending my shirts all those years ago. Thank you for having terrible mending skills that brought you to my door." They stood together watching the Nevada sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, their children playing nearby, and Bridger felt a peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. Eleanor had given him his first taste of happiness and the gift of rosemary. Miriam had given him a second chance at love and shown him that hearts could heal and expand to hold new joy without diminishing old memories. The years continued to unfold with their mix of triumphs and challenges. In 1894, a drought threatened the ranch, but Bridger's careful water management and Miriam's resourcefulness saw them through with minimal losses. Rosemary, now 17, had grown into a confident young woman who could ride and rope as well as any man on the ranch. She talked about going to college, maybe studying veterinary medicine, and Bridger and Miriam encouraged her dreams even as they worried about her leaving. Benjamin, at 9 years old, showed a mechanical aptitude that suggested he might be better suited to engineering than ranching. He was constantly taking things apart to see how they worked, much to Miriam's exasperation when he disassembled her sewing machine to improve it. Margaret, now 5, was already demonstrating her mother's skill with needle and thread, creating elaborate outfits for her dolls. In 1896, Miriam received a letter from Philadelphia. Her younger sister, the one who had stolen her fiancé all those years ago, was now widowed and destitute, asking if Miriam could send money. Bridger found his wife staring at the letter with an expression he could not read. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. "Part of me wants to ignore it," she admitted. "After how they treated me, I feel like I owe them nothing. But another part of me remembers that we were close once before everything fell apart, and I am not the same person I was then. I have built a good life here, and maybe I can afford to be generous. It is your decision. Whatever you choose, I will support you." Miriam ultimately sent a modest sum with a letter explaining that she could not provide ongoing support, but hoped this would help her sister get back on her feet. She never heard back, and while that stung a little, she found she could live with it. The past was the past, and she had no desire to dwell there when her present was so full of love. The turn of the century found the Emerson family thriving. Rosemary had indeed gone to college, becoming one of the first women to study veterinary medicine in the western states. She returned to McGill in 1901 and set up a practice serving the ranches in the area, making her parents immensely proud. Benjamin, at 16, had received a scholarship to study engineering and would be leaving for school the following fall. Margaret, now 11, showed signs of inheriting both her mother's practical skills and her father's head for business. In 1903, Bridger and Miriam celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. Their children were grown or nearly grown. The ranch was more successful than Bridger had ever dared dream, and they had carved out a life together that felt like a true partnership in every sense. They marked the occasion with a quiet dinner, just the two of them, while the children stayed with Thomas and his wife in town. Over dessert, Miriam reached across the table and took Bridger's hand. "You remember what you wrote in that letter?" she asked. "All those years ago when you told me how you felt. Every word. I probably have it memorized. You said you could not offer me wealth like Marcus Thorne, but you could offer me a home where I would be cherished. You have kept that promise every single day of our marriage, Bridger. You have given me a life richer than any amount of money could buy. You mended more than my shirts and my broken heart," he said. "You mended my entire life. You took a lonely rancher and his grieving daughter and made us whole again. Everything good in my life traces back to the day I climbed those stairs with a basket of torn shirts. Best mending job I ever took on." They laughed together, and later that night, lying in the darkness of their bedroom with Miriam tucked against his side, Bridger reflected on the strange paths life could take. If Alina had not died, if his shirts had not fallen apart, if Miriam had not come west seeking a fresh start, none of this would have happened. It was impossible to be grateful for tragedy, but he could be grateful for the unexpected blessings that emerged from it. The years rolled on, bringing grandchildren and new challenges, and the slow, satisfying process of watching their family grow and flourish. Rosemary married a fellow veterinarian in 1905 and gave them their first grandchild, a boy they named Bridger after his grandfather. Benjamin graduated with honors and took a position with a mining engineering firm, though he made frequent trips home to Nevada. Margaret, following in her mother's footsteps, became a skilled seamstress and opened her own shop in McGill, modernizing the trade with new techniques while maintaining the quality craftsmanship Miriam had taught her. By 1910, Bridger was 57 and Miriam 52. They had slowed down somewhat, hiring more help to manage the ranch's daily operations, but they remained active and engaged with their family and community. They sat together on their porch most evenings, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for more than 25 years. One such evening, with golden light spilling across the high desert and the sound of grandchildren playing in the yard, Miriam turned to Bridger with a smile that still made his heart race. "If you could go back to that day when you first climbed my stairs," she said, "knowing everything that would happen, would you change anything?" He did not have to think about his answer. "Not a single moment. Every joy, every challenge, every ordinary day has led us here. I would not trade this life for anything. Neither would I." She laced her fingers through his. "We built something good, did we not? We built something extraordinary." They sat together as the light faded, and the stars emerged one by one over Nevada. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had taken their broken pieces and crafted something beautiful. A rancher and a seamstress, brought together by torn shirts and kept together by love that grew stronger with each passing year. Their story had started with mending, and in a way, it had always been about mending. mending clothes and hearts, mending the gaps in their lives, mending the world into a shape that could hold their happiness. And as they sat together in the twilight of their years, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, they knew that some things, once mended properly, would last forever. The ranch would eventually pass to their children and grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But the foundation remained the same: love, partnership, and the understanding that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest needs. A man who needed his shirts mended, a woman who knew how to make broken things whole again, and a love story that proved hearts, like fabric, could be stitched back together stronger than before. As darkness settled over the Nevada desert, and the first chill of evening crept into the air, Bridger and Miriam rose from their porch chairs and went inside to the warm, lamp-lit house that held decades of memories. Their 3 children were coming for dinner the next day, bringing spouses and grandchildren, and there would be laughter and chaos, and all the beautiful noise of a large, loving family. But for tonight, it was just the 2 of them, as it had been on that first evening when Bridger had nervously climbed a set of stairs with a basket of mending and found his future waiting behind a simple wooden door. They prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of longtime partners, and when they finally settled under the quilts Miriam had stitched years ago, Bridger pulled his wife close and breathed in the lavender scent that still clung to her hair. "I love you," he murmured into the darkness. "I love you too," she replied, her voice already heavy with sleep. "Always have, always will." They drifted off together, 2 hearts beating in comfortable synchrony, their love story complete and perfect and exactly as it was meant to be. The Wild West was changing, becoming more civilized with each passing year, but here in their bedroom in a ranch house outside McGill, Nevada, the old values of loyalty and devotion and hard-won happiness remained as strong as ever. And somewhere in the house, tucked away in a drawer in Miriam's workroom, a faded letter rested between layers of tissue paper. The ink had browned with age, and the paper had gone soft from handling, but the words remained as true as the day they were written. A rancher's clumsy declaration of love, the brave offering of a broken heart that hoped to be made whole. That letter had changed everything, had set in motion a love story that would span decades and generations. And in the morning, when Miriam opened her workroom to begin a new sewing project, she would see that letter in its place of honor and smile, remembering the man who had been brave enough to ask for what he wanted, and the woman who had been wise enough to say yes. Their story had begun with mending, but it had become so much more. It had become a testament to second chances and unexpected grace, to the power of love to heal old wounds and create new joy. It had become a foundation upon which a family and a legacy were built. And it had become proof that sometimes the most important repairs we make are not to fabric or buttons or torn seams, but to the human heart itself. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, the Emerson ranch settled into peaceful quiet. In the barn, horses shifted in their stalls. In the yard, a late-season breeze rustled through the cottonwood trees. And in the house, 2 people who had found each other against all odds slept peacefully, their lives intertwined as completely as threads in a tapestry, their love story complete and whole and absolutely, perfectly real.